managers, the leaders who are getting the best results are the ones who are incorporating development conversations right into those regular one-on-ones. So frequently those are so focused on the business and the projects and the milestones and the budgets and all of that. And rightly so. I mean, you got to run the business. But if you started those one-on-ones with 5 minutes of what have you learned since we talked last? What kind of work, what kind of challenges might you be open to? If we did that on a regular basis, it builds trust, it creates that psychological safety, it builds the loyalty and engagement that organizations need, and that ultimately drives the results and the retention that most organizations really are looking to achieve.
From humble beginnings, Insurance Claim HQ has grown to one of the largest property casualty firms in the country. We didn't do it alone, and you shouldn't either. Every week, we're talking to claims professionals and top experts from all over, all to help you grow your business and make you stronger. Let's level up together. I'm Galen Hair. Welcome to the Level Up Claims Podcast.
Career growth isn't just about climbing the ladder. It's about developing skills, leadership, and opportunities in new ways, all of which can help you retain your top talent. Here to help us break it all down is career development expert Julie Winkle Giulioni. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Galen.
So I'm super pumped. I'm actually a huge fan. Loved your TED Talk in Pasadena that you gave. I've watched it maybe a few times. Granted, not while we're here today because that's more about focus, but huge fan. So you have spent a storied career training professionals, but I'd like to know what led you to that path.
You know, there's something from the time I was a kid, there was something that was really exciting to me about learning. And on the front end, it was the taking it in. But over time, I would be like a teacher's assistant in classrooms. And there's just magic when one helps to facilitate a new idea sinking in, a new way of approaching something and someone. And so, you know, I found my very first real job, I was teaching modeling and charm to children. And I kind of feel like I've grown up a little bit with my audience. So I moved into teaching high school and then at the university level and back into industry again. But again, the common thread has been creating the space so that people can think differently, approach work differently, behave differently, and be more effective.
I love that. And that is true, right? So like career development really has evolved like over recent years. So like, what are some trends that you've noticed that you think business owners, like especially small business owners, are not paying attention to?
Yeah, you know, the big thing, and I don't know that it's even a trend, but it's hopefully a growing awareness that career development doesn't have to mean promotions and moves and increases. You know, especially in small businesses, you don't have a lot of layers for folks to grow through and dollars to keep spending on salary. And the truth is that what I found through the research that I did for my book Promotions Or So Yesterday, there are actually things that people want even more than that climb up the corporate ladder. And so a savvy small business owner or big business owner for that matter, who gets to know their folks, who understands what their motivations, what their interests are, they're in a wonderful position to be able to create growth opportunities that don't cost anything.
So can you give us kind of like a fun example of something you saw a business owner do that you thought was like really in line with that? Like there are either no or low cost ways to really give a value add to an employee by just getting to know them.
Yeah, absolutely. So what our research has tells us is that the dimension that's most interesting to people across generational levels, genders, is contribution. People want to feel like they're making a difference, especially since COVID. If we're going to come to the office, if we're going to do this kind of work, then it's got to make a difference. And so when a business owner, when a manager gets to know someone and gets the sense that, hey, this is someone who's really wanting to live on purpose, to be of service, to make something happen, to feel that sense of meaning. There are so many ways to facilitate that in a typical organization. So I think about, one manager recently who had a recent college grad, a real rock star, but noticed that she was starting to kind of lose the sparkle, didn't seem quite so engaged or excited to be in the organization. And so through conversation, figured out that she had been really engaged in college in social activism and sustainability efforts, and she really she got a lot of juice out of that kind of purposeful work, and she was doing something that was a little bit didn't feel quite as aligned, and so he was able to figure out a way for her to actually represent the team. He needed someone to represent his team on a sustainability effort for the organization. So she got that juice back. She got to make a difference in a way that resonated for her. And not only was it kind of budget neutral for him, it actually was helpful because he didn't have to go and end up sitting in those meetings.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like, it's a fascinating insight, and I read a lot, and I read Will Guidara's book on reasonable hospitality, and there's a whole separate message there, right? But one of the interesting things, are you familiar with his whole coffee thing that he did at his restaurant?
I don't think so.
It's the
No.
same thing, right? He was like, coffee sucks even at really, really nice restaurants. They always have bad coffee. And he like figured out why. It's because they have the sommeliers running the coffee program. Well, these are people that are excellent with like wines, or they might have a mixologist who are excellent with drinks. But he's like, somewhere I know in my restaurant, there's a coffee aficionado, right? So I just have to find that person. So like, I think your example reminds me so much of that, because it got him out of meetings, yes. But at the end of the day, it was also something his business needed to do.
Exactly. It's
like,
the ultimate
had to do it.
win-win. Yeah.
So, I mean, it strikes me that one of the ways to do this, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, is like to kind of go through, make a list of priorities, initiatives, all those projects that you've like backburnered, right? And then try to identify if there's people on your team. Like, I think we tend to be like, oh, who would be good at that? Julie would be good at that. Oh, yes. Bobby's great at that. I trust him. He'll do it. Okay, I'll have Paige do that, right? And they just kind of like fill in names. But maybe I think what you're suggesting is saying like, who would enjoy this? Who would love this?
Yeah. And who will grow from this? I think that's a lot of the focus that we need to look at, because one of the major reasons people come to an organization, stay at an organization, leave an organization is because of growth or the lack thereof. And so the only tweak that I might make, Galen, on what you suggested is maybe start with the employees, talking with them about where their interests lie, what they want to learn, what kinds of experiences they want to curate, what they want to do. And then look around at all of the organic work that needs to be done. That once you're aware of those interests, suddenly the matches just become pretty obvious.
Yeah, it strikes me as the barrier to entry there is you actually have to care about your employees. So, for some people that might be challenging, but I'd argue there's a business purpose, even if you find that personally difficult.
I would agree with you. I frequently find myself saying career development begins with care, quite literally, CARE. And I don't know if that's a barrier to entry so much, because so many of the managers that I talk to, the leaders I talk to, they want to do this, but maybe they haven't seen it done well. They haven't experienced it. And they have this overwhelming sense of what it looks like to develop people. It's got to be this big thing, this ornate meeting, all of these documented plans. I mean, they just build it up to be something so overwhelming that it's just like, oh, I can't possibly fit that in. But if we can break it down, we can show them that you can get the work done through the development of others. We can show them that short conversations layered over time actually are more valuable than big old summits once a year. Then suddenly career development, the barriers to entry, the activities that are involved go down a little bit, makes it more doable for folks.
Talk to me about those short conversations over time being more effective.
Yeah, it's kind of like an apples to apples sort of question. Do you want to spend 2 hours sitting away in a corner once a year creating this massive career development plan that we all know will be filed away until next year this time anyway? I mean, the annual planning, I mean, we don't even do strategic plans annually. I mean, we're looking quarter to quarter. The world is just moving too quickly for that. Do you want to spend 2 hours doing that all at one time? Or maybe spread that 120 minutes out 10 minutes a month or
Mm.
5 minutes a week. The managers, the leaders who are getting the best results are the ones who are incorporating development conversations right into those regular one-on-ones. So frequently those are so focused on the business and the projects and the milestones and the budgets and all of that. And rightly so. I mean, you got to run the business. But if you started those one-on-ones with 5 minutes of what have you learned since we talked last? Where are your interests now? What kind of work, what kind of challenges might you be open to? If we did that on a regular basis, first of all, it demonstrates greater care, back to what you were just saying. It's not just I'm checking the box because HR told me I've got to do this time of year. I'm incorporating this because I care about you. But it builds trust. It creates that psychological safety. It builds the loyalty and engagement that organizations need. And that ultimately drives the results and the retention that most organizations really are looking to achieve.
That makes so much sense. And it's so easy, right? Just to have that conversation, but you have to make it habit. And I think to do that, you have to really understand why that's important, why that conversation is important to begin with.
Yes. I think you hit the nail on the head. It is so not rocket science. In fact, we just had dinner with some friends, a couple, and the guy walked in and he said, you know what, I looked at your book and, it really isn't rocket science. And his wife was just mortified, thinking that he was going, was insulting me. He said, but here's the thing. I put it into practice. I put some of those actions you suggested into action, and I can't believe how it's turned my employee around. And he's a tennis coach, and he's got an assistant coach. And he said he's just a different person, and the kids, they're behaving differently, and the parents are more engaged. He said, so it's not rocket science, but you got to do it, and that's the habit piece of it, isn't it? And sometimes
Yeah.
those simple things are actually harder to incorporate because you think, oh yeah, I'll get around to that. But it really comes down to what I've figured out is it comes down to having great questions at your disposal. Just having a question to ask and a curious mindset with which to listen. And then the rest is on the employee. I mean, it really takes so much pressure off us as leaders and managers when we kind of reorient like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It really just requires them to be open with us, honest with us, and then hopefully thrive when given the right opportunities. But which unfortunately not everyone will, but the ones that will, I think the payoff will be massive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, even those who don't thrive in a given, role or assignment or new task, that doesn't mean that we just cleave them off and, okay, no more, no learning for you. It means that we have the opportunity to learn more about who they are and what they need and the kind of support that might be required. They might be the person who shouldn't be choosing coffee, but should be choosing or doing something else in the business.
I love that. Now, hiring and retaining top talent is a challenge. I think, none of us would even exist if it wasn't such a major challenge. And every once in a while, I get this line of thinking from business owners that I talk to, which is essentially, why would I develop them if they'll ultimately just leave me anyway, or even become my competition?
Yeah.
So what do you say to those folks?
Well, I mean, you're going to lose them, whether you develop them or not. At some point, nobody stays in an organization 40 years any longer. So the potential for loss is there, whether you develop somebody and they go, or you don't and they go. The advantage of developing them is at least you've got someone who's more capable, who's able to contribute more while you're there. We also know that development is a key lever when it comes to retention. So people who feel like they're growing, like there are opportunities, and not necessarily for a promotion, but opportunities to grow even within the context of their current role, those people are inclined to stay longer. So you've got that connection because they know you care. But even when, the worst happens and that great person you invested in leaves, you've got someone who's out there speaking well of the organization, writing positive things on Glassdoor, helping you to recruit and find, that next level of talent. But Galen, I love the comment about, well, and what if they go become a competitor? There's a client that I worked with in Los Angeles, and this leader of this office was just marvelous, just a natural developer. And he had a bit of a revolving door because he'd bring these folks in, he'd develop them in their organization. They didn't have the funds to be able to offer as competitive a pay package as they'd like. And so folks were leaving and going to competitors. And yet the man kept doing this and cheerfully doing it. And I finally had to say, John, I just got to ask. I don't want to bring you down, but you keep doing this and you keep losing people. How is it that you continue to do this with a smile on your face? And so he told me a story of a deal that he had just closed. There was this massive opportunity that his organization could not take on by itself. But he partnered with someone he had trained, who had left, who had gone to a competitor. The two of them were able to collaborate and get this deal that neither could have independently. And he said, I could not have done that with someone whose skills I didn't trust, whose ethics I didn't trust, who I didn't know. And so by building the capacity for even a competitor, he set himself up for a deal that was unattainable otherwise.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, and it works. Look, I came from a very, very large law firm that I loved. I loved the people there. I loved the environment there. I didn't like the work schedule, but I don't have the horror stories that you hear people talk about with their first real job in whatever career they ended up in. And I remember early on in my career, they had 1,000 lawyers. When I left and started my own firm initially, I had 3. So every once in a while, opportunities popped up that I just could not take. And I just sent them to them. I got nothing back for it at all. But they were so good to me that I sent them work.
Yes. And you just got to believe that kind of goodness that you invest comes back around. I love that. Good for you.
But you're right. I mean, it's so true. And, they leave and become your competitor, but at the same time, you taught them what they know. So when that thing comes in that just isn't the type of thing they can handle, guess who they're calling? Assuming you treated them well.
Yeah. Well, and if you want to get really altruistic too, we're elevating the quality of our industry when we do that as well. They're going to a competitor, but the work product and the way customers are treated, I mean, that all is rising in the process. And that's got to be good, for the economy as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's got to be. All right. So this is kind of an interesting question. With AI coming out, automation, and kind of those changing workforce expectations, like what does career development really look like in the future? I think in a world where so many people are asking a computer what to do.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I wish I had a crystal ball. We're all going to be seeing what that looks like. Certainly, the nature of work is going to change. How we do our job with this new powerful tool is going to be different going forward. That said, I think there's still a huge, we talk about in our business, AI versus HI. So, artificial intelligence versus the human intelligence piece of it. There's still going to be a human component. And when it comes to helping people grow, it's got to be, the human component has got to be there. I mean, certainly we're going to grow tons by doing our queries and, figuring out all of the AI stuff. But so far, at least, ChatGPT has not been able to ask me the kinds of questions and demonstrate the care and the interest in me and help me connect with opportunities in my organization the way a great manager does. And so when we amplify the quality of our work and the speed of our work and all the rest of it with the use of this tool, and then we amplify the learning and the engagement of the individual using the tool through, exceptional managers. I mean, there's just going to be no stopping us.
I love that. Now, I will tell you, I saw this really interesting product that's still being demoed where basically it collects all your employee information, all of it, from progress meetings, et cetera, transcripts of meetings. Now, the downside of this is you have to record everything in order for this to work, right? But you can ask it things like, hey, I have this new project. Who would be interested in it? And it'll search the internet and it'll read everything and it'll say, Julie actually was in this club in college and she might enjoy this. You should see, right?
Yeah.
But you still have to have the idea yourself. AI can't do that for you.
Yeah. And it's a great vetting, it's sort of like the filtering tool. But then you've got to have the kind of relationship with Julie that she's going to be open and talk about what her interests are. And you've got to be willing to have that conversation with her. And I'll tell you, I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth here, because when we wrote the third edition of Help Them Grow or Watch Them Go, we included a book bot and created an AI supported tool that leaders can go to, and they can type in, here's the latest conversation I had with Galen. Here's what I think he's interested in. Here's some of the opportunities we have. And it'll spit back an outline for how to organize the conversation, let you practice, get some feedback, really kind of refine things. So I think, AI is going to affect the nature of everybody's work, but it's not going to take humans out of the learning equation for sure.
Yeah, it's the assisted aspect of it, right? That book bot would not exist, A, but for you creating the actual content, and then B, you still need the business owner, the business leader, to craft the scenario, respond to it, and ultimately take that knowledge and implement it, right?
Exactly.
And look, I don't know where we're going to be in 10 years. It's crazy, some of the things these computers are doing, but I do think at the end of the day, people look at AI as a solution, and I really see it as a supplementation.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a tool, and those of us who figure out how to use that tool well are going to really create remarkable results.
No, I couldn't agree more. So our audience, they're largely public adjusters, contractors, even some attorneys. We've talked about a couple of ideas, but what are a couple of other ideas of ways they could start to implement kind of a growth mindset towards their employees? They should be very comfortable with the phrase growth mindset because they're always talking about growing their businesses. So what are some things they can do to start employing a growth mindset towards their team?
Yeah. So much of what's really required for the growth mindset to take hold is that sense of psychological safety. When you think about it, growing, learning, trying new things, I mean, it's pretty risky business. When I'm learning a new skill, when I'm stepping out of my comfort zone, it can frequently be like one step forward, two steps back, and folks aren't inclined to adopt that kind of a growth mindset. Yeah, lean into it. Let's try and experiment and fail, perhaps. If they don't feel like their managers, their bosses, the business owners, if they don't have their back, if they don't feel like there's a safety net there, the grace to make mistakes and learn from it. So I think, the most profound thing that business owners and leaders in general can do to build that kind of growth mindset is really create trusting relationships with those whom they lead. Really being vulnerable themselves, talking about their mistakes and how they've learned from them. But then also working with folks so that they understand, how to fail fruitfully, how to make mistakes and learn from them, and they know that that's not going to be a recipe for walking out the door, sort of thing. So when leaders, whether you're an adjuster or a contractor or whomever, when you take those kinds of steps, you cultivate the environment that then allows the growth mindset to just naturally take root.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me, the kind of concept of psychological safety. Can you think so one of the things I see a lot, because every once in a while I get to look into other businesses for various reasons, and what I see is a staff or a team that largely is not trusting of the leader, but a leader who thinks that they are. So that disconnect obviously happens. Can you think of some, maybe, well, obviously I don't want any names because we want to protect, both the innocent and the guilty,
Guilty.
but what are some examples of like where maybe leaders make a misstep in terms of trying to create that trust?
Oh, there are lots of examples. It's the disconnect between our intentions and the effect that we have on others. Because we know, I mean, most of those leaders, they're not bad people. They're not trying to instill fear in others. They don't realize the effect of the behavior. And so, yeah, I mean, we could, how much time do you have? We could talk for quite a while about leaders who inadvertently are creating that kind of angst. Folks who say one thing and do something else, the not walking the talk, from my experience, is one of the quickest ways that leaders can lose that kind of trust and credibility with their folks. So when people see a disconnect between what people say and what they do, that undermines trust. It also causes folks to follow generally the negative example rather than what they're being told. So I think that would be one example. I think the other one is where leaders don't know how to make failure or mistakes safe. Where it's like the idea is good. Okay, go experiment, but they haven't thought about how do I mitigate the risk, especially in an environment where in most businesses, one mistake is all it takes to lose a customer, to undermine credibility. And so a manager or a leader who allows people to just go and experiment kind of willy nilly without the guardrails, without the safety net, without the check-ins that ensure that things are going well, then let people fail miserably, and create really bad consequences, business consequences in the process.
Yeah, and the employee sometimes beats himself up. I still remember this because I felt so bad. It must have been 8 years ago now. I had a marketing employee, very first firm I started, very small. I gave her a project that I thought she would excel at. I was trying to follow these same principles, right? She was interested in it. She seemed interested. We actually did the meeting to kind of onboard the project. She was so excited, never seen her smile like that, on the edge of her seat. And then I said, okay, and I let her run with it. I didn't do the check-ins and it bombed. She just, and she ended up quitting before even turning in the bombed project. And the reason was at the end of the day, she didn't have the skill set she kind of thought she needed. I actually was more or less okay with the work product that she created under that. Like we probably would have hired someone to come in and clean it up a little bit, but she'd done a pretty good job. But honestly, just not checking in with her, not giving her any reinforcement. Hey, I think you're on the right track. Let's do this and this. She judged herself so badly that she literally like left because she didn't want to face me.
Oh my gosh. Well, and this is such a perfect example of intention versus effect, right? Your intention was good. You trusted her. You wanted to give her the runway, let her, figure it out. But the effect was she felt unsupported and didn't have those kinds of guardrails. The other end of the continuum, of course, is micromanagement. You don't want to go there either. But where is that Goldilocks balance for the individual to be able to provide the support and help her build the confidence, so that she would know she was, 80, 90% there.
Yeah, that Goldilocks balance. That's exactly right. Well, Julie, you have been amazing. Everything I hoped that our conversation would be. But before you go, I do have to ask you, what does it mean to you to level up?
For me, it's really about continually challenging myself to step out of the comfort zone into that discomfort zone, because there's always something to learn. Sometimes it's a big thing, sometimes it's a small thing, but really ensuring that growth and learning continues to happen through intentional steps to make it happen.
I love that. Julie, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, Galen, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
I'd like to thank Julie for joining us on the show. Little things like those conversations about interests, paired up with finding the right project, can make a massive, massive difference in your team members' development. And frankly, it's cheap, it's easy, and it's not that much work. Follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player.